So when I'm not podcasting, I do concern myself with what the younger audience listens to. Because even with this program, I do reach out and I do get an audience many times that's much younger than myself. And I love that because of what I talk about. It does resonate with a younger audience. When I look at my numbers of the kind of audience that I get on this program, I look at the average of people now, about 30%, a third of my audience is over 45, but then I look at from 18 to 44, I can look at 21, 37, 52, 67% of my audience is under the age of 40, under the age of 44. That's pretty good. So I got a good audience here that listens that's younger. And actually what's really interesting is my audience when it comes to gender, it's split down the middle. 49 to 49%, 1% non-binary, 1% non-specified. Fascinating. Like knowing about all that stuff. Thank you, Spotify. So on this program, I'm going to talk about the students out there. All you kids. Teenagers coming in response to a current events conversation by the New York Times. So here's what we're learning about this. They're being asked about companies taking political stands, podcasting, life philosophies, and other things. So let's go and take a couple of the sound bites here, or the couple of the snippets they have of some of the commentary that's being done here by some of these people. So teenagers in New Jersey, Texas, and Pennsylvania participated. They were asked if students should take political stands, what subjects they would like to podcast about, and what personal codes they live by. And the comments were lightly edited for length, but otherwise appear as they were submitted. So should corporations take political stands? So if companies, when we see them, if they're about to get canceled, or if they need to do things to be socially conscious, right? That's what they're talking about. So one kid named David said, corporations should not take political stances. First off, if corporations are taking full-out political stances and seeing who is right and who is wrong, the company's already too far gone. But mainly, saying corporations should take political stances is completely missing the point of companies and corporations, which is mainly to give you the best product. Their job is not to cater to one audience, but to develop the best product so that we may live better lives. I don't care what Coca-Cola thinks about the Georgia voting laws. And if you do go to Coca-Cola for political advice, I think you need to rethink your life. And overall, he says, I think you need to rethink your life. Overall, I think this question strikes at the larger theme of, should everything be weaponized for the political war? And the answer is no. I agree. Because everything is too political. And some companies, listen, to each his own. If certain companies have a policy where they want to go ahead and speak up about it and they want to be more cognizant of it, go right ahead. That's fine. But the other thing, too, is that a corporation, if they feel like they're going to cave in, they want to do that, so what? But what they shouldn't do is cave in or feel like getting canceled makes them need to go and do something about it. The sports organizations is one example of that. But they're doing what they're going to do because they have their talent, their athletes, their performers that are being contracted. They're going to have to do something about it because they have to answer to their employees. So in some cases, that's where I understand the political stance might not be good for everybody. There's obviously going to isolate and they're going to alienate some people. But if they're willing to do that, so what? That's what it comes down to these days. A middle schooler named Gabriel, he says that it's better for large companies to stay out of the controversy, which might affect the sales of that company. Companies only care about important issues when there is pushback or protests. Corporations may pretend to care about mainstream problems, but it's clear that when all their values align perfectly what's more popular, this is why it's just easier for companies to stay out of it and pretend to not care. Okay? And another one named Thomas from New Jersey, he says, companies should present themselves as nonpartisan when it comes to political issues. Not every employee of a company shares the same beliefs. CEOs should attach their own names to their own political comments rather than using the company name to speak for everyone. I love that answer. Damn, Thomas, that was on the money. Good stuff. And if private companies become political, well, that's a different story. If you don't have shareholders to answer to, that might be a different story altogether. So let's go ahead and go with Gigi in Virginia in this story that says, I've always been opposed to the position that politics should be kept out of music, art, etc. I care very little whether large corporations speak about the issues they care about. It's not about It's not because I would rather just consume my products in peace, unbothered by the political views of the companies I buy from, but rather because statements like the ones in the mentioned companies made are purely performative and in all likelihood would not affect whether or not the bill became law. So yeah, performative allies. I talked about it all during the Black Lives Matter protest. Remember that? Performative. Because what are we getting from this? You know, what's the advantage that the communities that are supposed to be being helped by it? Is it helping at all? That's the real question. It's not as if there isn't a need to help, but are the organizations that are speaking for them, or the corporations or the celebrities, are they really doing something for them or just being performative? And that is a line that needs to be well defined when you're talking about it. And that's what we want. We don't want hypocrisy, right? We want real help. We want people that are disenfranchised or oppressed or discriminated against. We want them to be lifted up. But we don't want happy talk. We don't need that. More about political opinions. I'm going to leave that out. I'm going to move on to podcasting because I thought this was actually very interesting because that's the part that actually caught my interest. If you could make your own podcast, what would it be about? Now, we already know that celebrities have all these different podcasts and there's all these other things that people are doing right now. So there was a story that was written by the New York Times about these young podcasters who are growing up on mic. And Ella from New Jersey writes, if I could make my own podcast, it would be about one of my passions, baseball. Professional baseball and most professional sports for that matter are always and have been dominated by male announcers. While this in itself is not a bad thing, I feel that I could introduce a completely new and fresh perspective compared to existing announcers and commentators. As an 18-year-old female, many people may not expect me to have the knowledge and passion for baseball that I do. However, I could go to head with some of baseball's biggest fans and certainly hold my own. Well, I hope she gets to do that. But remember, all of you people out there, if you're interested in doing podcasts, I'll give you a little secret out here, King of Podcasts, Anchor.fm, which is who hosts this very program when I'm not podcasting. You can start your own program. You can make money off of it. Anchor.fm/start. Anchor.fm/start. Do that because I'm getting paid for this. And they've been doing very well for me. And I've had nothing but good to say about the Anchor.fm platform. It's been wonderful. Excellent job. Kudos, 100%. And it's free. And you're on Spotify right away. Like, you got to have it. It is really good. Gigi in Virginia writes, I love classical music. I want my podcast to explore different forms and pieces, composers and how their lives shaped up their work, and my opinions on classical etiquettes. What's up with clapping between movements? I know a lot of classical musicians are of the opinion that other genres like pop and hip-hop are somehow inferior, or that only listening to classical music makes them more sophisticated, but my podcast would be about making classical music more accessible, so modernizing the idea of it. Introducing it to people who used to think it was boring. So yeah, that's pretty good. The idea of trying to make it something that people will be interested in. A younger audience, getting them to adopt into classical music. It's important. I think that music is quite important because it's still used quite a bit today. And it's funny because growing up, watching Bugs Bunny cartoons and Tom and Jerry cartoons, what's interesting is they always did use some kind of classical music in some way, shape, or form on some of the episodes, on some of the shorts we'd see. And we would learn about these particular things. We'd learn about plays and Broadway and things like that. We would learn about it from watching Looney Tunes cartoons. Isn't that funny? We'd learn something about history from Looney Tunes cartoons. It's just the way it was. So some way to educate people, we need more of that out there. And not something that just forced down our throats. Not just stuff about animals and stuff about, whatever. Some cool stuff. Classical music can be interesting. And it should be. It's too bad there are no radio stations out there that can play classical music. But you can find it online. You can find it on Spotify, I'm sure, and Apple and all those other places. Couldn't hurt to check it out. Isabel in New York says, I was enchanted by literature ever since I was little. The way an author could convey such extreme emotions or anxiety or satisfaction through words on a page enticed my mind, drawing me to literature of all kinds. Well, to go back and maybe do book reviews, things like that, sure. But also remember that what podcasters are doing out there now, we're getting a lot of the shows since, 2012, I think it was, when Serial came out. We're getting now the narrative ones. We're getting the ones that are getting series out. We're getting a full story in arcs. Like we're getting a full arc of a story and we're learning about it almost like a documentary, and we're catching all this going on, which is fascinating. And then Tyler from Cambridge Insanity High School, he says, if I can make one, it would be for the geeks of the world. I believe there's enough pain and damage in our world today, and my podcast will try to combat that. Making sure that everyone feels at home and part of the family. We will look at a bunch of cool fandoms, movies, series, books, and more, all to help unite us for a love of creative stories and ideas and create a unique community of many different fandoms and people, one that will hopefully make everyone feel like they belong. Okay, that's not bad. Something to counteract the corporate stuff. Because, see, I do wrestling podcasts, but mine is in the area of wrestling fan podcasts, which are very popular, by the way. And there are some corporate podcasts out there, but it's not the same as you have fans, people that are really passionate about what they're watching or listening to or what they're consuming. And how big of a fan are they? How often do they go to live shows? How much merchandise do they have? How much knowledge do they have of the product? All of that. If you're a super fan and you're able to go and talk about something that you want to talk about, and you could talk about it every day for hours on end and talk somebody else's ear off. And here's the best part. When you want to do podcasting and there's stuff you want to talk about that you can't talk about with your friends because they'll just get tired of talking about it after a short while, but you can't stop talking about it, then that's what you do. So for me, I can't stop talking about radio. I can talk about radio for hours and hours and hours a day. And I've done that with some people I know in the radio industry, and I could talk about it for hours. A lot of it. I used to have a friend of mine who used to work overnights over the Clear Channel building or iHeartRadio right here in West Palm. I'd go ahead sometimes, and I'd go over there, check him out during a shift, and I would actually sit his whole shift, and we would just talk radio. And he would kind of just be monitoring the show, the stations and all this stuff, and we would just talk along, and we would just kick it. And it was fun. When you have something that you can't stop talking about and you could talk about it forever, yeah, those are the best podcasts, in my opinion, when you really have knowledge of what you're talking about. And that's what I like to do. So when I go ahead and do my wrestling podcast, I could jump on and talk about a topic. But what I also do now, more than my podcasting than ever, is I make sure to keep it to a certain time frame and not just ramble on just to ramble on. I got to have a little bit of a format to work off of and say, okay, I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to go to this amount of time and then cut. So I usually know that a wrestling podcast, I'm going to do an hour a week, unless something happens. And the media podcast, the same thing. It will be 1 hour long. The most that people need to go and listen to for the week. Because if they're trying to catch it in bits and pieces, they might not have a chance to sit in a whole hour to listen to the whole show, but at least they'll catch most of it. That's what I want to do. And for the most part, when I've done an hour long, I know at least that people will listen to about 40, 45 minutes of it among the entire audience. They'll try to catch as much as they can of it. So that's good. I can appreciate that. There's more people that talk about it. One other person talk about humanity and each person's meaning of life. Now, this is about exploring diverse perspectives. Oh, that's right. They were talking about that. Then another person talks about creating more diversity in the world of podcasting. The more diverse information and perspectives you're able to get, the more interesting and valuable the knowledge you will be. And another one talks about the heavy division in today's America. Many people hate one another simply because of their identity instead of having a meaningful discussion about whether either party believes what they do and why people identify with what they identify. Well, you can't do dialogue and discourse right now. Not anyway. It's just too broken. I'm just saying. And then the impact social media has had on my life when I was a teenager. Another person says, my generation has grown up with the internet, and when we now have access to so much information, I would focus on exploring how social media has affected our thinking processes as well as certain decisions that we make. Another one, growing up, the challenges teenagers have to face. Another one says about mental health. Another one talks about life lessons that I wish I could tell my younger self. Another person says, I will make it on tips for surviving high school. Another one, a medium to explain different adult topics to teens in simple terms. And then they talk about the code they live by. They asked about that because the New York Times did a story called To Lead the World a Bit Better and Other Codes to Live By. So one section was treat others with kindness. Then you have do your best. And then you have be true to yourself. And so there's, simple things, which I can appreciate. The kids got a pretty good idea. So I can appreciate what they're going from and what they're trying to do. So, well-intended, smart kids. And I always feel like this next generation is going to be different than what the millennials were. I don't know why. I got a niece that's just smart as a whip, and she's so into things and well-grounded, and, she's very well-loved. And looks like she's going to turn out okay. Looks like she's probably be successful one day. We'll see how it goes out. She just turned 18, so I hope the best for her. And other than that, I just see a lot of kids that are 18, 19, 20 years old, college kids. If they're not caught up in the political crap that's going on their campus, they're doing all right. They're smart, and they're entrepreneurial. I mean, look at the kids on TikTok. How many of those kids are like 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and they're doing something with themselves? Or they're just having fun, and they're not bogged down with all the crap that's going on around the world. They're finding things to make them happy, and they're not worried so much. They're not apathetic, but they're enjoying life. And the pandemic has not held them down, which is most important. Anyway, I'll leave it there, and I'll talk to you next time.